In the summer of 2019, on a quiet hillside in rural Vermont, something extraordinary was destroyed in a single afternoon. 3 bulldozers, 12 acres, gone by sundown. A berry farm that had taken 4 years to build, planted seed by seed, watered by hand, coaxed through late frosts and early storms by a 14-year-old boy named Callum Pruitt, was scraped from the earth like it had never existed. The company that ordered the demolition believed it was removing an obstacle. They were wrong. What they actually destroyed was evidence. Living, breathing, legally documented evidence, rooted into the soil, catalogued in binders, and protected by a form of agricultural law most people have never heard of. By the time Callum walked into a courtroom 3 years later, that demolished farm had become worth far more than the land it once sat on. If you believe honest labor deserves to be protected, hit subscribe. We tell stories about real courage, real stakes, and real justice. And before we go further, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. These stories travel farther than we ever expect. Callum Pruitt was not the kind of kid who wanted to be somewhere else. Most boys his age in Harwick, Vermont, spent their summers chasing each other through the woods behind the Dollar General or killing afternoons on a cracked driveway basketball court. Callum did those things too, sometimes. But by the time he was 10, he had already decided that the 2-acre patch of cleared land behind his grandmother's house was more interesting than anything else available to him. His grandmother, Dorothea Pruitt, was 71 and had a bad hip and a memory for soil that most agronomists would envy. She had gardened that land for 40 years. She knew where it drained poorly after rain. She knew which corner caught the most sunlight in August. She knew the names of the beetles. Callum absorbed all of it. He wasn't perfect. He was stubborn about shortcuts. There were seasons he underpruned the older canes because pruning felt like punishment. He argued with his grandmother about compost ratios. He once skipped 3 weeks of irrigation in a dry July because he was convinced the plants looked fine. They were not fine. He lost nearly a third of his blueberry crop that summer. He sat with that loss. And then he got better. By the time he was 12, he had expanded the original plot into a serious operation. 12 acres of certified organic land, producing strawberries, blueberries, and a heritage variety of black currant that his grandmother's mother had brought from upstate New York in 1961. The farm existed in time differently than everything around it. In March, before the snow had fully retreated, Callum was already turning compost into the beds. Dark, rich material he had been building in rotating bins since the previous autumn. Berry plants are heavy feeders. They want organic matter. They want pH balance. They want patience. The strawberries were first. They came in June, low, fragrant, the kind of red that looks almost painted. Callum ran a small roadside stand 3 days a week. He kept a notebook of every customer who returned. The blueberries were the financial backbone. A single mature high-bush blueberry plant, properly managed, can produce 8 to 12 pounds of fruit per season and remain productive for 50 years. Callum had over 200 plants in various stages of maturity. He had added native wildflowers along the borders, not for aesthetics, but for pollinators. Wild bees and honeybees both. Without them, yields dropped by half. The black currants were the rarest part of the farm. The heritage variety, his great-grandmother's original cutting stock, propagated over 3 generations, had never been commercially registered. It produced fruit with a flavor profile distinct enough that 2 local restaurants had begun featuring it on their menus. The farm smelled, in late summer, like something between jam and rain. Horizon Land Partners was not a villain in the way movies imagine villains. They were a mid-sized development company based in Burlington, with a clean website, a board of directors, and 17 active projects across New England. They had acquired the land parcel adjacent to Callum's farm in early 2018 as part of a planned expansion of a mixed-use housing development. The project had investors. It had deadlines. It had a construction window that opened in June 2019 and could not, according to their financial model, be delayed. The problem was a boundary. A surveying dispute had placed 12 acres of Callum's farm inside the legal footprint Horizon had purchased. Their attorneys reviewed the chain of title. Their surveyors filed a competing map. Their project manager sent letters. Callum's grandmother hired a local attorney, a retired man named Gerald Ashford, who had spent most of his career handling estate disputes and small-town zoning appeals. He filed responses. He disputed the survey. He requested a formal mediation. Horizon's attorneys did not respond to the mediation request. Instead, in late June 2019, 3 pieces of heavy equipment arrived at dawn. Callum was at the farm when they came. He had arrived early to check on the blueberries after a stretch of unusual heat. He heard the engines before he saw them. He stood at the edge of his eastern field and watched a bulldozer push through the border wildflowers. The bee corridor he had spent 2 years establishing, like they were nothing, like they had no function, like they were just weeds. The strawberry rose went next, then the blueberries. 214 plants, some of them among his oldest and most carefully tended, were uprooted in under 4 hours. The black currant section, irreplaceable, genetically unique, was scraped and piled with the rest. By noon, 12 acres of living agricultural infrastructure had been reduced to bare, compacted subsoil. Callum called his grandmother. He didn't say much. He just stood there in the stripped field with his phone pressed to his ear. She told him to come home. She told him to bring the green binder from the barn. The green binder. Callum had been keeping records since he was 11 years old, not because anyone told him to, but because his grandmother had taught him that documentation was part of farming. Soil tests, yield records, expense logs, correspondence with the Vermont Agency of Agriculture. What he didn't fully understand, at 14, was that 4 years earlier his grandmother had enrolled the property in the Vermont Agricultural Land Use Registry, a state program that granted formal protected status to actively farmed parcels meeting specific organic certification and continuous use criteria. That registration had never been contested, which meant the land Horizon had destroyed was not, legally speaking, available for development. Gerald Ashford pulled the enrollment documents, cross-referenced them with the state registry, and spent a long night on the phone with an agricultural law attorney in Montpelier named Patricia Wendy. Patricia Wendy had spent 20 years litigating farm protection cases. She agreed to take the case. What followed was 3 years of preparation. Callum finished high school. He took a job at a local nursery to learn propagation techniques. He began, slowly, painstakingly, rebuilding the black currant stock from a single surviving cutting his grandmother had kept in a pot on her kitchen window step. Meanwhile, Patricia Wendy built a case that was less about emotion and more about numbers. She hired a certified agricultural appraiser to calculate what the farm had been worth at the time of demolition. Not just the crop value, but the biological infrastructure. Mature blueberry plants have a documented replacement cost that includes not just purchase price, but years of establishment time. Soil that has been built up with compost and organic matter over a decade has measurable economic value. A proprietary heritage plant variety with no commercial equivalent has intellectual property standing. The appraiser's final figure was significant. She also commissioned a soil remediation study showing the extent of the compaction damage, how many years and how much investment it would take to restore the land to its pre-demolition agricultural productivity. Horizon's attorneys filed multiple motions to dismiss. Each was denied. The Agricultural Land Use Registry enrollment, the court found, created a statutory obligation that superseded the conflicting survey. Horizon's acquisition had been conducted without adequate due diligence. The trial lasted 6 days. Callum testified on the 3rd day. He brought the green binder. He answered questions about pruning schedules, pollinator corridors, soil amendment logs, and yield forecasts for the black currant variety he had been rebuilding. Expert witnesses confirmed what the records showed. An agricultural economist testified about the long-term earning potential of a certified organic heritage berry operation. A botanist confirmed the genetic uniqueness of the current variety and its potential commercial value. Horizon's defense argued that the boundary dispute had been acted on in good faith. The jury disagreed. The judgment came back at $3.2 million, covering crop value, soil remediation costs, lost future earnings, and a punitive component for willful destruction of protected agricultural land. Callum was 17 years old. Horizon Land Partners had come to clear a field. What they got instead was a harvest, one they had planted themselves, in arrogance and haste, and were now required by law to reap. The money was placed into a trust. Part of it funded full restoration of the 12 acres, professional soil remediation, replanting, new irrigation infrastructure. Part of it established a small agricultural scholarship at the local high school in Dorothea Pruitt's name. Callum used a portion to formally register the heritage blackcurrant variety with the USDA Plant Variety Protection Office. It received official designation in 2023. The farm reopened in the spring of 2024. The blueberries, replanted with larger stock, bore their first serious crop that August. The strawberries came back heavy. The black currants, still small, still establishing, grew quietly at the edge of the field. The bee corridor was rebuilt, wider this time. What a development company had destroyed in an afternoon took years to restore, but it was restored. That is the part that matters. There is a principle that experienced farmers understand intuitively, even when they cannot always articulate it. The most valuable things on a farm are often invisible to people who are only looking for land. The microorganisms in healthy soil, the pollinator corridors, the generational knowledge held in a heritage seed, the paperwork filed quietly with a state registry by a 71-year-old woman who knew, without being certain why, that documentation mattered. Callum Pruitt did not win because he was lucky. He won because he was prepared, because his grandmother prepared him, because knowledge carefully kept outlasts destruction. George Washington Carver once observed, "When you can do the common things of life in an uncommon way, you will command the attention of the world." Callum Pruitt farmed berries, a common thing. He did it with records, with intention, with respect for the soil and the science. And when the world came to take it from him, he had everything he needed to take it back.